Good morning, everybody. Welcome to another one of Ironside's Take 30 sessions. We appreciate your joining. It is morning here in the New England area where I'm located. My name is Paul Hardy. I am Ironside's EVP of Professional Services, and I also am the practice leader for our advisory services where our data strategy practice lives. And today I'm going to talk a little bit about data strategy. And most importantly, I'm going to talk about creating a winning data strategy. So we'll talk more than just about the nuts and bolts of a data strategy, but how do you actually make one that's successful? And we have several kind of tricks of the trade that we use, kind of rooted in the world of change management that we hope people will find constructive. So for those of you that have not attended, a little bit about Ironside. This is our tagline. We help our clients use data to make better decisions about their business. Very simple mission statement, but it's one that we really like because of its simplicity. And we've had 20 years of success in doing that. A little bit more about Ironside, just who we are quickly. As I mentioned, we've been doing this for 20 years. You see 20 years of what we call end-to-end data and analytics value. And this diagram represents that end-to-end. It starts in the upper right with advice and data strategy services. That's one of the practices that I lead. And from there, we transition from providing advice and strategy into the design, build, and deploy phase for any solutions that come out of that strategy. And we do that in multiple dimensions. We do it in business intelligence platforms. We do it with underlying data assets, data warehouses, marts, and the ETLs associated with that. And we do it in advanced analytics, where today we build AI and machine learning-based applications for our clients and their use cases. Then you see govern on that wheel. We'll talk a little bit more about governance today, critically important. And lastly, manage. So we operate a managed service, particularly for BI environments, to take the management of those off the hands of our clients. So that's a little bit about Ironside. So let's talk about what we're going to discuss today. So how to create a winning data strategy. So here's my thesis, and I hope this is a bit controversial, but a bit of a relief to everybody. The first is that a data and analytics strategy is not really that difficult to puzzle. If you are thinking about your data and analytics strategy and are confounded by how elaborate and complex the challenge may be, it's actually not that challenging for talented and experienced practitioners. Yes, like the folks that we have at Ironside, right? We have the value and the opportunity of having done many of them. We see many different implementations of variations of data and analytics technology at any given moment in time during the course of a year. So for us, the difficult part is not solving the puzzle of what a data and analytics strategy ought to be for one of our clients. Right? There are, in fact, common themes for data and analytics strategies that they exist today, and they tend to morph over time. New concepts come in, others kind of roll out. And they do that at a fairly fast pace today in the analytics industry, as I'm sure you're all aware. But these are some of the common ones today. Of course, cloud migration, that one's been around for a while. It will stay around for a while. But typically in a data strategy, folks are trying to understand to what degree they should migrate to the cloud. You see self-service expansion, also a very powerful theme today, going from kind of legacy BI platforms to modern visualization platforms and the underlying capabilities and tools that enable those analytics to be pushed out to the edge of the organization where the analysts are sitting in the business and can do things much more quickly. Data virtualization, kind of a hot topic right now, I think. If all of you, I'm sure, are reading various sources of literature and data and analytics, and you see virtualization come up quite a bit. One of the themes that's current today. Of course, predictive, prescriptive, AI, machine learning, all of those terribly important today. And lastly, kind of the holy grail of themes that everyone would like to have, but we don't see very often, but we work on, is data monetization, right? So not just how do you create better data and analytics within your organization, but you actually have the opportunity to monetize data that you've created that you might not have done in the past, right? So these are just some of the themes. You probably have others that are running through your mind, but we're very familiar with all of these. We work on them continuously. So thus my kind of controversial statement that the data strategies and analytic strategies are not a difficult puzzle for us. We will get you to what the right answer is. So then what's difficult about data and analytic strategies? They require hard work and analysis on first, your current state fundamentals, because a data and analytics strategy is not something that exists based on the commonly held beliefs out in industry and in articles and publications today. It's based on the reality of what your organization already does, right? So you really have to understand your current state fundamentals. Roll up your sleeves, get very deep into multiple aspects of your current organization, right? Because as it says, there's very rarely a green field to start. So we really work hard in understanding what you have, all right? And then business user needs, okay? Now, business user needs, we all in the IT, data engineering, BI fields, we work to meet the services and needs of our business brethren. And if you're looking for their needs, you sometimes can believe that they might not know their own needs, and that is sometimes the case. But it's very important that you spend a lot of hard work on trying to help them identify their needs. So even when they might not know what their needs are, those of us that are practitioners in this space can help flesh that out for them across the themes you see above or others in general. And we'll talk more about that. So what separates then a winning strategy? If it's not so difficult to pick the ultimate strategy and underlying architecture and that sort of thing, then what separates a winning strategy from one that doesn't win? And this goes back to Change Management 101. It is stakeholder and business approval, and then subsequently, of course, adoption of what you've created, right? That's it. Not meant to be shocking, but it's that simple. Stakeholder and business approval and adoption of the data and analytics strategy that you've created. So how do you create that? For us, these are the three key components to creating a winning data strategy. Providing a vision, demonstrating value, and generating ownership. Those are the three keys to a winning data strategy. And now what we're going to talk about in the rest of the presentation is kind of the how-to. So how do you get those things done? Okay. So first, with vision, we're going to talk about having a use case focus. Okay. With value, we're going to look at productivity and cycle time benefits and business cases. So putting that actual value into hard and soft savings, quantitative benefits, and qualitative benefits, and doing that with models that are understandable to your business constituents. And lastly, ownership, right? Actually creating an opportunity for those stakeholders to participate in the process in unique ways and to paint a vision where they will continue to participate in the process. So let's talk about those each in turn. First, we would submit from the perspective of vision. This is not a vision. If you're coming from the BI, IT, data engineering world, if you're part of that community establishing your data strategy, a picture like this might be constructive inside of your organization, but it's not constructive necessarily to the business community whose, again, agreement and adoption or approval and adoption we need. So what do we think is a vision? It's built around use cases. Creating use case inventories for the business community is something that resonates with them. Again, I mentioned they may not understand what their future vision is, but through the right approach, you can speak to them about their analytic needs, tease those out of them, and create, and in fact, by inventorying and articulating those, create hope and vision for them that the business problems they're facing are ones that can actually be solved. Not the notice that you're going to use a different kind of cloud storage to solve their problem, but rather you've identified a use case and you've identified an approach to solving that use case. So highly recommend taking a use case focused approach. And that's just one step in creating that vision. Because the other thing that we believe in is not being myopic around, again, the stack. So present a picture to the business constituents of a holistic view of what's going to be accomplished for them. So you see here what we call our 6 pillars of data maturity. And by starting with this, at least model in mind, it is not intended to be overwhelming. It's intended to be, as you see the first bullet point there, holistic. Right? So to the business, it's important that you're not just focused on that 5th pillar, architecture, that you're also focused on the 6th pillar, skills, or the 4th pillar, governance. Right? They're at least well enough aware that if the data doesn't have sufficient quality, who cares what the IT and BI and data engineering world is doing with their technology. Here you can see, as we were just mentioning, being use case driven is critically important in this approach. Being pragmatic, this is back to starting with what's there and prioritizing the gaps, right? It's not a green field. So letting them know that you can acknowledge the reality. Being stakeholder driven, which all of this is about. And the last principle here, at least, is lean, which really speaks to this value component that we're going to talk more about in a moment. So that was vision. Now let's switch to value. So value, pretty straightforward, right? There are lots of capital investments that are made in organizations today, and most organizations have some kind of process, either with finance office in IT or with the CFO's office or controller's office, where you've got to go through and make capital allocations and things that are not surprising there. Sorry about that. Didn't realize that was a build. This should be equally conducted when you're looking at a data and analytics strategy, right? Understanding and following the standard practices of finance in your organization is critically important. Understanding budgets and identifying both the costs and investments that are required, as well as any cost savings or revenue or productivity improvements that are created through the benefits of the various initiatives that come out of your data strategy, right? So focus on really demonstrating that value, certainly quantitatively, and of course, qualitatively. And the other component of this is productivity and cycle time benefits. This is very, very important, we have found in creating business cases, because it is not always the case that there will be some clearly evident hard dollar savings from data analytics and strategy. But you can create very well documented cases of productivity and cycle time benefits that create a benefit for the business leader to do whatever they wish with, right? Could that mean potentially headcount reduction and hard dollar savings? It could. More likely, it's apt to have existing resources being applied to higher uses. And that's a very beneficial outcome. And you can actually quantify what that use is. This is an example we did for a client talking about the adoption of a modern analytic framework, which was, of course, as we mentioned, common themes, more self-service oriented with the appropriate stack to develop self-service. And what I would point out to you here is what you see at the bottom of the chart that indicates with a self-service and modern data platform, as we called it, a certain amount of work based on an analytic process here would have a labor cost of, say, 1x, and in the current world, it was about 30x. It's a remarkable savings, and this type of a slide would differ for everyone based on the processes they follow, but this sort of thing can be identified, and again, productivity and cycle time benefits to the business user are really important, so we try to focus on those in demonstrating the value. So next we'll talk about ownership. So how do you generate the value in some of the business cases that we talked about? Well, at the core of that is understanding the distribution of producers and consumers of analytics in the businesses that you serve today. So this is a model, the one that we use, or variations on this, where we talk about who are producers, who are consumers, and what are some of the hybrid roles that do a little bit of both. And what's important is to identify who those are across the organization today as a way to create a baseline for those business cases, but also for the very obvious impact it has in getting stakeholder involvement early on. Right? So we do this through a survey where, I'll go back actually, we do it through a survey in which the survey recipients, in addition to answering a variety of questions, which we'll talk about, self-identify as these types of roles. Right? So once we have those roles and results of the survey, we're able to get a baseline of what the distribution is of the different roles. And this often comes as a surprise, particularly when you're looking at self-service. Organizations don't always recognize that there are as many analytic activities going on in different parts of the organization. And this is a way to capture that. So this is an example where we were able to generate a specific number. And why is that specific number important? It's because ultimately those business cases I talked about and the productivity improvements and cycle time improvements apply to this community of people. So typical of business cases, you end up doing some math where you apply the amount of productivity or cycle time reduction that might be created times the number of people performing that certain task, and that's how you create parts of your business case. So using that survey early on to engage the stakeholders, so you're again capturing that theme of ownership, but also you're contributing to that theme of value that's going to make for a winning data strategy as well. So as part of that survey, the other thing that we always want to do is try to get a baseline of the current state of maturity. You saw that maturity model that had kind of the 6 different components to it, the 6 pillars as we call them. And you also want to get a baseline of the issues. So in this particular example, what you see are questions related to those pillars in order to baseline what the current state is. And here you see a heat map associated with the scores that came back, and a quick synopsis of as what we saw as some of the issues that were raised. Now this is important because you're immediately again engaging stakeholders, and you're letting them know that you of course care about their issues. They're getting to see the comprehensiveness with which you're asking questions, and that they're actually questions that are relevant to them. They're not just about, quote, the stack, right? So we think those surveys early on are important. These are absolutely followed up by interviews. This is just, if you will, the initial shot across the bow to get the set of data so you know what you're going to talk about in more detail and to whom. Also with ownership, ultimately you want to create what we call a roadmap. Right? So if ownership it's partially about making sure, of course, that the stakeholders believe that they were heard early on, but what they also want to know in order to take ownership is what is the impact going to be on them going forward? Right? How do they continue to participate? They've hopefully really liked the participation you've created early on. They want to know how that continues. So a roadmap spread out over some number of months, typically at least 24 to 36 months, helps the business constituents understand what types of activities they're going to participate in, what kind of change they might see in the organization. And one thing I'll point out, it may be a bit of a challenge to see, but even looking at this example, you see that only a component of that is again related to the technology. Right? If you're in the business community, what you do care about are there leadership and structure changes that might be associated with a transition to a new strategy. Here's a category we call workforce effectiveness that entails really that skills category in the maturity model, and how do we actually upskill organizations. The business will be very interested in that. Governance, everyone should be interested in governance. And lastly, you see Anchor App, and I'll talk a little bit more about Anchor App in a moment, but this is just an example of how to consolidate a set of initiatives that come out of making that transition in the from state of the strategy to the to state, right? That's only going to be accomplished by a set of key initiatives, and you need to show the organization what those initiatives are and how they'll unfold over time. So lastly, on this concept of ownership, just a few additional thoughts on ownership. And again, these, I describe them as lessons from kind of Change Management 101, but it's a very important class if you haven't taken it. So it just speaks to really powerful concepts and being able to implement these types of change initiatives. So the second bullet point there is engage stakeholders in a few validation workshops, not results reviews. So in our own methodology and process as we do this, we punctuate our work with validation workshops. And what that means to the stakeholder and how it increases ownership is that they have spent time with you filling out surveys, participating in interviews. They've provided you with a lot of information, right? How do they become assured that they have been listened to and that information has actually been incorporated in the results that are about to occur? And that's what we do in validation workshops. So we're partially repeating information they have given us and showing how it has been synthesized with other information to create valuable recommendations and conclusions. But you have to re-engage those stakeholders to participate in that. It's a great way to generate ownership. So punctuate your process with those types of activities. Sometimes they feel like they're a little bit expensive if some of them are on site and you have a geographically dispersed organization, now that we're able to go on site places. But they can be done virtually. They have to be carefully engineered to be productive, but they're absolutely a critical step in developing that stakeholder ownership. And as I mentioned before, of course, interviews follow the surveys. But the survey is really important. It helps, it's just a function of efficiency. You can't survey, you cannot interview everyone out there, but you can pretty much touch base with a survey with everyone today and consolidate that information. And from that, glean the critical issues and pick the key stakeholders that you want to have further discussions with. So last point there is consider a concurrent proof of concept. And this could be related to any particular technology. However, our view is it should really relate to the accomplishment of one of the use cases that has been discovered in kind of the assessment phase of this, right? We talked about how use cases are critically important to create that vision for business constituents and business stakeholders. And seeing one of those visions fulfilled is extremely powerful if you can get it done in the course of a very short period of time. So what you see there is the sub-bullet is find the right business champion. The problem itself is secondary. You want anyone who can get a problem solved in a new way, consistent with your strategy, that needs that problem solved, and it typically is willing to be the most verbal person you can find about it, right? We're all accustomed to change initiatives and we understand the power of a champion. This is absolutely the case in the data and analytics strategy. When I say the problem is secondary, it's because a driving component of what problem you choose will be based on a combination of what you're trying to demonstrate, but also what can be accomplished quickly, right? But that is actually secondary in nature because it can be positioned as a proof of concept. It's not supposed to solve all our hardest problems, but it is a demonstration. By the way, these are often extremely effective with believe it or not, machine learning use cases. You can carve out very particular machine learning use cases. You may be thinking that, well, that's very difficult. We haven't done a lot of machine learning. We don't have all the infrastructure in place. Conversation for another time, where you may have heard or seen Take30s from our data scientists, but there are absolutely ways in which you can take the machine learning use case and produce it very quickly and inexpensively. We help people do that. But it creates a fantastic win and really opens up eyes to the vision of what's possible. But of course, POCs can be done in other components, even if it's, as an example, data wrangling, where you're bringing in a tool where an analyst previously had difficulty in doing some type of analyses, and you're able to do a POC with a new data wrangling tool and create momentum and excitement that way. So a variety of ways to do a POC, lots of things to think about in that. So that's really it. Again, my conclusions, don't worry so much about the stack and the data assets. Very important questions, how is my architecture engineered? What's the tool set in my stack? Extremely important, not to minimize the importance of those questions, but that's not the hardest part of the data and analytics strategy. Particularly working with folks like Ironside, we will get you to the right answer. The issue is, how are you going to be successful? Well, again, we believe successful means that you get, very simply, the gate is you get stakeholder and business approval of what you're doing and adoption of what you start to create. And again, the three tools there are for those stakeholders and business constituents: create a vision, but a pragmatic one that focuses on their use cases and how they can be solved, demonstrate value, focus on what the consumer and producer makeup is within your organization of analytics, and show them that you can create productivity and cycle time benefits. And of course, put those into business cases that follow traditional finance practices in your organization to the degree that you can do that. And lastly, focus on that ownership of those business stakeholders. And that means engaging in every part of the process, starting with the surveys and interviews, continuing with validation workshops that take place during the course of the work that you're doing, and finally concluding in roadmaps that demonstrate to them the actions they'll have to take and how changes will occur to them across the organization over time. So I'm going to move on to questions, but before I do, I'm just one in a series of Take30 hosts for you here. Debbie, did you want to speak for a moment about these upcoming events in Take30?
Sure. I just want to point to everyone that you can go to ironsidegroup.com take30.com/resources, and you can always see what's coming up. And in our June Take 30 Thursday series at 11 a.m. Eastern Time, next week we're going to be doing a reboot of the Modern Analytics Framework. So we did have a 6-part series on that back last fall. We've now are going to be summarizing it with all new sort of graphics and messaging. It should be a really exciting session next week. And the following week, we're doing the modernization of Cognos Analytics and giving some pointers on how to do and modernize that enterprise BI environment. Also, we have a parallel series running on Tuesday. Data security, data protection is always so critical for data analytics. And so the Not If But When series that we're doing in conjunction with IBM is every Tuesday at 11 a.m. Hope everyone can join us. Thank you.
All right. And Debbie, with that, we'll go to Q&A if there is any that has come in. We've got a few minutes left. I think we're doing pretty well on time.
Sure. Thank you, Paul. We do have a couple questions that have come in, and everybody else, please feel free to put some in the question bar. The first question had to do with, as we're doing these data strategy engagements, do you find that many companies think they have a data strategy, but actually different groups are viewing data differently?
That's a great question. The answer is an interesting one, in the sense that if you were to accuse someone of not having a data strategy, they would take offense and swear they do. And if you were to say to someone, well, we want to understand your current data strategy, some will laugh and say, some of those same people would laugh and say, you know what, we actually don't have a data strategy. So it is a bit all over the board. And of course, defining what a data strategy is there's not one common definition of it. As you saw, ours is pretty comprehensive. But I guess I've forgotten the actual point of the question, Debbie, but there only because I found it humorous. But there are various versions of data strategy. Oh, and do they differ across the organization? Different views across the organization? Yeah, they absolutely do. It's predominantly because the IT organization, again, focusing back on the stack of data engineering, BI, analytics organization, folks whose job it is all day to be concerned with that domain, may believe they have a data strategy, but if you ask the business, they don't. That's one of the things that we ask about early in that surveys, is about the business strategy, the IT strategy, and the data strategy, and how the business sees those aligning. And that's often when you discover that they will ask the question, what data strategy and what business strategy, even though, what IT strategy, even though the other side of the coin, if you will, believes those exist. So important to get that discrepancy fleshed out early on.
Thanks, Paul.
Hope that was.
Another just question that came in is, you've really focused on the business approach, being the vision, value, and ownership. Where or when does tool selection of how you're going to do it come into the process?
Yeah, and that's sort of the part. Thank you for asking the question. We didn't go into the whole process in detail, but that's a little bit of the part of when I say it's not that great a puzzle. With, again, tongue in cheek, it's a big challenge. It's just that if you have the right people to get it done, it's extremely doable, as we have. So the process for data strategy continues through an assessment, a synthesis, and a solution design phase. And that solution design is taking all of the things that you discover during the assessment and synthesis phase, and in fact, designing that stack. I've made light of the stack, again, only because it's not the hardest part of the puzzle for folks like us, but it is, in fact, a primary focus of the output of a data strategy, no question about it. So we define, that stack consistent with the data strategy that we help the client create, and we do that in extreme detail through phases. So yeah, it's a good question, and I didn't mean to make too light of it. It is absolutely a critical outcome of this. In fact, what I will say is a lot of the initiatives that you see in the diagram that I showed for the roadmap, there was, in fact, in the one example I showed, something called the Modern Data Platform. And that particular stream in the roadmap was comprised of the implementation and the project associated with implementing a variety of those types of technologies in the stack. So.
Just time for, I think, one last question, and that has to do with sort of data quality and data integrity. And do you find that going through this data strategy approach, you know where to concentrate your efforts on making sure that you have the best data possible?
Yeah, we do that in a couple of ways. One is that it emerges in a variety of areas. So one is in talking with the business about use cases. Many of the issues and challenges that arise have to do with that data quality, data integrity point. Not that they understand the nuances or the challenges in making that as successful as possible, but what they know is that some of their use cases can't be met or fail today. Or they're in meetings where they have different sources of the truth, all because of these underlying data quality issues. So something they might not recognize, but we would recognize and identify and trace down, at the appropriate time to their kind of root cause. The other place it comes up is if you saw those 6 pillars, you saw a governance pillar. Well, the responsibility for data quality, data integrity, and a variety of other associated functions exist within that governance structure. So one of the things that we'll do is not just hear about the outcomes of bad data strategy, but we will understand its root causes by looking and assessing at current governance practices. With respect to the review that we do of existing platforms and architecture, we can also see whether some of the right tools and processes and procedures are in place within the technology side of the house to try to resolve those problems or prevent them. So.
Terrific.
All right, Debbie.
I think we're out of time.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. We appreciate it. And please feel free to contact me if you have additional questions. Have a great day.